First order of business is opening and approval of the minutes from August 12th, 2021 meeting. Discussions?
I move that we approve.
Second it.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It's approved. Number 2 is the draft landscape ordinance.
So, give a brief introduction to it, and you can tell these are not public hearings, they're not official action tonight, so hopefully we can just get some discussion rolling. We'll kind of dive into the text, some ideas, and I think the majority of you were able to attend a field trip that we did last week over to Weber Basin Water Conservancy and their demonstration garden. So I think partly to gain some ideas from there as far as what water efficiency looks like in our landscapes and some of the things that they would like to promote, we encourage and in some cases mandate in our ordinances so that we preserve our precious water resource in the region better while still hopefully having a beautiful area to live in. The other part I think that was beneficial in that for me is understanding a little bit better where we have a little flexibility. So they've provided us some key points that they want to make sure that we're addressing, primarily limiting turf. I mean, that really is one of their key goals, and in particular areas where it doesn't do much for anybody. Park Strip is an example in their case. And so I think as long as we address those, we do have some ways that we as Kaysville can be unique maybe in how we approach it. And so to that, I've kind of taken their draft ordinance, put some of my twists and flavor on it, I suppose, if you will, and be interested in maybe some of the things that you caught out of that or ideas you've had that maybe aren't in this or should be in this. And so I'm just going to roll through here on the big screen into the ordinance. So I don't spend a lot of time on the purpose statement. If that's of more interest to you, we could dive into it, but just in short, to preserve our water interest, right, is the reason for the ordinance. They had a bunch of definitions. I just left them in there. I think if it were to go the way I've suggested, some of these terms would not be applicable because I've scratched sections of the ordinance that may include them. But I left it in case maybe we said it's important to keep that type of look. And just as an example, we'll see what the commission thinks about it. If I can find it. It has like evapotranspiration and some other terms that talk really about kind of the measurements and metering and style and how you determine how much water you're using, these special landscape areas and definitions that they take into these equations. So whether or not we get as deep into that and require that amount will ultimately determine if the words aren't in the ordinance, if we have to define them still or not. So I think this is where we get more into what we have. So the applicability of the ordinance provides, this applies to all new construction and development and any expansion or rehab of existing public, quasi-public, commercial, industrial, or multifamily. So I think that's kind of what they were getting at. That just, I don't know, maybe matched our ordinance language more and it was shorter, so I understand it better when trying to enforce it. This really is for new projects and it's not for new single family, not for existing single family type development. But again, a new single family neighborhood, those developers are going to be required to make sure that those new homes actually implement these standards. So you're going to see, in theory, subdivisions come online over the next several years where no grass in any of the park strips. They're going to have a lot less grass in their front and even in their backyard. And it's going to be uniform across entire developments because it's a new development in those cases.
Lyle, I see here that we've taken out rehabilitated landscaping for public agency projects. Why specifically do we take that out? Because I think like if we're going to, let's say a school goes through a remodel, I think we should have that conversation with the school district and require them to reduce their square footage, because as a public agency, I think in the city, we also want to make sure that they're being a fair user of water resources. If they're going to rehabilitate, whether it's a school district or the county, who also has property, or another public agency, I think we want to have that conversation as they're rehabilitating projects and doing rehab in our city.
Yeah, I'd be happy to put it back in. within our ordinance, we kind of fit schools under just a public. So it is applicable to public, but we could specify a public agency. Maybe that's broader.
And I think
That's fine.
I think rehabilitation is applicable, because I think if I'm going to go through and do a readjustment of that property or rehab on it, I think it's a good time at that point to build that cost into it.
Sure. Yeah, and this, so as written, so to maybe get your take on it. So it is applicable to new construction and any expansion or rehab. I'll broaden the public definition to include public agencies. And just, I don't know the exact answer on this one, but schools and state entities get to not follow our rules all the time. They follow their own thing anyway. But nonetheless, there will be other entities and agencies out there that we want to make sure it's applicable to, and they might be willing to follow our ordinances if we have a guide for them, so.
I know, and I'll speak this, I know in Farmington, where the county offices sit, we have to follow the Farmington rules. And they're very explicit with the way and I think that, I'll say this, Kaysville should be Farmington with the entities that are in there.
Yeah, I'd be happy to broaden that and make sure we're inclusive of it.
So if we just stay on this right here, I think it could be worded a little better because it's not entirely clear. It could be read to say that this applies to all new construction, period, and this and that. You know, so someone could say, does that mean I have to, I know it talks later on about single family. I think it could be read to imply that it would apply to someone building their own house, not with a developer. And maybe that's what we want it to say, but if we don't, I think you would reword it to say this. You'd say, all new construction, comma, development, comma, expansion, comma, or rehab of existing, because then you're saying, we're only talking about new construction of public, quasi-public, commercial, industrial, multifamily. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It just,
Yeah, so that may be
refining that a little bit.
You. I think we want it to apply to new single family, if it is new.
okay, so even beyond, because the way I read the later on paragraph, I can't remember which one it is. Well, I'll tell you. It said, if it was being built by a subdivision, or by a builder developer who's doing a subdivision, but are we saying we also want it to apply to any new single-family home?
Yeah, should.
Yeah, I think that's a question for the commission. I'm going to check to see if Weber Basin wants us to do that in those cases or not, if it's optional. But maybe just throw it out to the commission as what do you think is appropriate, larger developments or even existing lots, just the owner-builder type scenario.
I mean, if we want to stay on that for just a second, I confess I could be easily proven wrong on this, but I think that would go a lot farther than probably most municipalities go. I think it's a safe bet that most municipalities in Utah, and again, I'd be glad to be proven wrong on this, will apply these types of landscape requirements where you are getting as detailed as saying what plants and what percent of shrub beds and what percent of turf goes where on commercial, industrial, public, quasi-public, all of those things. But I think we would be the exception that applies it to every new single-family home across the board. I think we would be the exception, but I'm not sure on that.
Yeah, and so, in my opinion, I think you're correct. When you go real heavy into the coverage and plant types and species in a single-family type development, we would be the exception, and I think that's heavy-handed. So this may not be accurately reflecting it, but my idea would be the turf requirement specifically, and the park strip may apply to the single family, but the whole water calculation and the other coverages would be commercial, institutional only. So if it doesn't read that way, that's the intent, but maybe throwing that back to the commission again is, does that feel appropriate? Are we okay doing any restrictions? Maybe just, as I envision it, we get a site plan in for a new home. Okay, you got 35% grass or less, great, I don't care what the other details are on it. But when you come to build a new office building, we're going to look at a lot more detail. So that would be my thought of maybe a more appropriate route. I agree, we don't want to be too obtrusive on those types of developments. What do you think as a commission is appropriate in regulating single family?
I mean, one thing that it does, and again, this is a question for us to answer, or the council ultimately, of course, to answer, it will increase, albeit maybe slightly, the cost of building. Again, maybe this is a drop in the bucket, I admit that, but you're going to have to get, maybe we want to craft it so that we don't require this much specificity, but in order for the city to make a decision, if we were to say, okay, there has to be a maximum of 30% of turf, then you're going to have a drawing to scale, which presumably may be done from an engineer or a landscape architect or somebody who's going to draw that thing to scale. You're going to have to spend money on that. And then you're going to have to do the calculations on the percentages. And again, this is a minor cost, I get that, but we just have to think about whether we want to impose that on every individual single-family residential homeowner. I personally would say that's a good question that I don't know the answer myself of where I would fall on that. Certainly it would be fine on a commercial or these other, institutional or what have you projects, but to do it to every single family residential homeowner, it feels like the city is being as heavy-handed as HOAs are with landscape requirements. If we did that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to call Weaver Basin to clarify this before, obviously, we make a final decision. This is the text they said, so this document is their incentive requirement. So again, the idea is, generally speaking, they're just asking us to, hey, contribute. But at the same time, they're saying we also have incentive programs. If you do enough that we feel as an agency is helping save water going into the future, then we will offer the flip your strip or other incentive programs to your residents. So I think that's important, and we don't have to even hit those targets, right? But I get a sense there's probably enough interest in making that available. So I don't know that this requires we do it on those. I don't know what your take would be, but all developer or contractor installed residential, commercial, institutional, but it doesn't specifically call out single family. So I'd be happy to clarify that with Weaver Basin is, do we have to? I don't know. Beyond this, I probably just saw all residential and thought, okay, we probably got to do something on those. So it sounds to me, Commissioner Sumnall, if you would think maybe not regulate them at all, even on just the amount of turf. Maybe no grass at a park strip, but beyond that, do what you want on your side of the fence on your property.
I don't know personally what my opinion is yet, but I just point that out.
And maybe I'll look at this real quick with you. So this is kind of a one-pager, roughly. These are the things that we must have if we want our residents to qualify for the incentives. So it's saying, make sure it's new construction essentially, or the substantial renovation. Have the water sense, smart irrigation boxes, and timers and such in your home. Make sure people are using drip valves when you're not over in lawn and turf areas. Make sure your slopes are planted appropriately. Here's another smart irrigation controller. Make sure your dirt's covered with 3 inches of mulch of some fashion. No lawns and park strips or on steep slopes, or in this case, areas less than 8 feet wide, which also include a park strip. And then no more than 35% of grass or lawn total in a residential situation. Then commercial has a little more, no more than 15% of landscape area could be grass. Get rid of the turf in the parking areas and, again, less than 8 feet type areas. This is kind of a bioswale, low impact development deal to clean and take care of water. So if we hit those, the rest of it is saying HOAs got to play as well and need to participate. So it would have the city look and make sure our HOAs aren't stopping those requirements. So not a lot really. And again, we could just verify a little bit of that applicability. No spray heads if it's not over grass. Smart irrigation controllers, 35% or less in residential, 15% or less as far as turf and commercial, and our residents should qualify. So as we look at these, are we hitting those targets? Beyond that, I think that's where we have the flexibility to do what we think is appropriate as a city for the look we want in Kaysville.
So now tell me what the, sorry, I'm commandeering everything. What are those targets from again? That's from Weber Basin saying that if residents want to, or property owners want some incentives from Weber Basin that they are issuing under whatever program they have to meet those things?
Kaysville City has to require those in our ordinance. And then our individual residents can take advantage. Because what will happen is this is applicable to new construction primarily. But if I have an existing house, it's already landscaped, if I wanted to rip out my park strip, the city's not requiring based on that I only have 35% grass in my lawn and I shipped everything. But because I live in Kaysville, who has hit these minimum ordinance requirements for our new construction, existing residents can take advantage of their incentive programs for Flip Your Strip.
So they're trying to, I mean, I think I see what they're doing. They're trying to force or encourage, incentivize municipalities to do this, therefore the citizens can benefit.
Yeah, I think it's fair.
Citywide.
I mean, if I remember right, there was $1.25 per square foot of,
I think so, $1.25.
per square foot of strip removal.
Right. And that's their existing program, and they had the smart meter replacement, Flip Your Strip. They may have future programs as well that they've talked about that go beyond the park strip to help you rehab your lawn or whatever. And so I think Commissioner Sunlaw stated it well. They were saying cities make the mandate, and then we'll take care of your individual residents if the cities take care of it. They want to stop future perpetuation of heavy water consumption and less water efficient landscapes. Okay. Yeah, makes me want to make sure we're looking at this. So some plant selection, it talks about, these are very generic. I think making sure that they work in the climate, taking care of your slopes, you're not putting turf in park strips. The one thing I learned from the tour that we went on, which I thought was great, no artificial turf in those park strip areas. They just get beat up. When you have to do utility digs and things, you're tearing into fabric. And so I listed that there specifically. Not too detailed here, just to helping people understand what types of plants to look at. Talking about mulch and how to layer it, the soil prep, again, these are almost, it'd be tough to actually verify on installation, to be honest, so it's a little tough for me to have in the ordinance, but just kept it in there from what they have, and hopefully maybe people read through this and do a better job of implementing their items. Tree selection, so broad canopy, low growing, make sure that they don't block visibility, and that people are planting narrow trees where there's not a lot of room for them to grow, such as a park strip. So anyway, I took out the street trees shall be planted within existing and proposed park strips in a sidewalk. Kaysville doesn't currently require street tree planting. Just if you do it, let's do it smart. That's an interesting topic, and maybe it'd be a good one for the Planning Commission to go over. People love the aesthetic of trees up and down the streets and in park strips, and from some sense we don't love them much from the city side when they block our snow plows and grow out into the street and drop leaves and branches and gutters and eventually block visibility around driveways and intersections. So it's kind of this love-hate relationship with trees on that, and what's the right way to go. So again, I think what this would do is you can still do it. We're not going to require it within the park strip, at least citywide. And that could change over time as we look at specific streets or areas if you wanted to create kind of a boulevard or unique theme. But I don't know what the sentiment is here. If we love trees so much, we want to make sure we do it.
Well, I think we should require wireless Zelkovas in every park strip.
Right.
It's the only tree that can be planted in Kaysville.
We do have a lot of Zelkovas around. Those ones aren't too bad.
Wireless Zelkovas.
I'm not familiar with that specific.
They're like engineered to grow a certain height, so they don't get in the wires on your.
Wireless.
Wireless
Zelkovas.
Zelkovas, hence the name.
I know the most popular tree that goes into park strips are the flowering fir.
In the south, those are called devil's spawn.
So this is generic to everything. So again, whether it accomplishes this clearly or not, I appreciate the feedback. It may not be so clear. It gets into what is now required specifically for a new single family. And
See, but let me just raise a quick point then. Now, headings aren't necessarily always part of the interpretation of the text, but if you go to the heading, it says new residential developments, which arguably is not a one-off house here or there, right? I don't know.
yeah, I think it's a good question. I get a sense.
But A clarifies it. Keep going, sorry, I won't interrupt.
No, please do. So, again, I need to clarify that with Weaver Basin, but I'm curious if they say, yeah, we're talking new big subdivisions. I know you said you haven't necessarily shared your opinion. Is this anybody have strong feelings on that? If we want it to apply every time there's new construction, whether it's a group of homes or a single standalone lot somewhere?
I think they'll run into resistance if you do it for individual homes.
Well, I mean, one of my concerns on that as well is, as we just talked before this meeting, that if that were to stay in the ordinance, it in effect would be passed in the dark of night. Like, people wouldn't know that generally is getting passed, despite our best efforts to get the word out as planning commissioners or as city council on Facebook or what have you. But if let's say it had gotten out the word to every Kaysville citizen, and again, who will never be able to really truly know this, my guess is most would, like Wilf said, push back on that.
Yeah, and that's fine. So as long as that's an option, I think that must be the sentiment for the commission. And we'll have to look at how we apply that as staff. So you'll have large subdivisions that have a lot or two that have yet to be built on. So would this apply to those or not?
Right.
Right. And so there's some interpretation there we'd have to figure out over time. And it would be very few instances where there's a non-subdivided lot where somebody could build a lot of record, we would call it. So I would almost venture to say 99+% of every buildable lot in town is a subdivision or a lot in a subdivision.
Okay.
So, I think what you're saying is if the original builder developer is not there building those homes, if they have these spare lots here and there on occasion, we don't think this should be applicable.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, I think a developer who comes in and let's say they do, 20 lots or some bigger, 100 lots or something, the landscape improvements, though they're not going to be dedicated to the city like a right-of-way would, could be some perhaps included in a bond or something. I guess maybe I'm just brainstorming there, but what I'm saying is the developer with 100 lots would be able to absorb that cost and make it much more efficient and cut back on that effect down to the homeowner, the monetary effect. Whereas if we just apply this across the board to everyone, it might go too far monetarily. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know where I'm at.
So you're talking economy of scale.
Yeah.
So if the,
And a developer doing multiple lots is better able to bear the burden.
they can come in and, yeah.
It is more expensive. A few of you might have some input on this, and maybe a question I have with that. So Kaysville's a little unique, and maybe not entirely. So we have developers who come in and do start to finish, move in, lots ready. we have a lot of subdivisions where you buy a paper lot, you get your own builder, and, you know, you're not working with Ivory as an example necessarily, because we have a lot of higher-end homes, so they each have unique landscapes that they're doing base by base. So it could be a subdivision of 20 lots where every one of those lots is working with somebody different and could be considered standalone, so, yeah, I don't know. I'm just throwing out more questions and problems, I guess, than answers on that, but maybe any feedback there. Is that common, Dan? I know you probably see more of it than I do, or anyone up
I'm just
here?
sitting here wondering how you're gonna regulate it and enforce it.
Well, to Dan's point, one question I had is, who's going to be the botanist or the landscape architect on staff to say whether certain plants were fitting the requirements or certain, irrigation system is meeting the code or what have you?
I think that was brought up, wasn't it, where they rarely admit they just don't have the personnel. It's more of on a trust basis.
Yeah, and in fact, in this one, it's pretty interesting because, again, whether it says that or not, I think the single family idea was, here's, try and be cognizant, do some local scapes, some smart systems. Really, this 35% of the landscape area, as I envision it, is about what we would look at on the plan. And we could probably drive by after it's done and say it's close, but we're probably not going to measure even the square footage. And again, I'm not a botanist or a specialist in those areas, but I can measure square footage.
I meant horticulturalist too, by the
There
way,
you go.
not a botanist.
But yeah, even some of the things we'd be capable of doing, frankly, we probably just wouldn't monitor that closely post-construction. It would be extremely time-consuming,
Yeah.
even if we're capable.
So Lyle, what percentage, since we're talking about allowing in some areas and not allowing in others, or enforcing in, what percentage would you say would fall outside of the requirement of new builds?
That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out. Almost all the new development that I see coming it's the major land that's left. They're going to be big developments. They're going to be multiple homes coming in package. So
You'll get a smaller 3 to 4 lots.
a little bit of infill here and there.
So do we worry about flag lots at all, or other?
Yeah, and that'd be the question, right? So I guess I'd envisioned it originally. Yeah, if it's a new home, whether it's part of a big build or not. My read on it was maybe that's applicable, but
Lyle, I'm gonna
Maybe it
go
wouldn't
back,
be.
I'm gonna go back and ask this. I mean, if you have something on the books, don't you have to apply it equally to everybody? Because then you get into equal application of the law, because either you're doing it for everybody or you're not. And I think eventually you're getting into some areas of 14th Amendment issues, because if you're not equally applying it and having the equal due process with people, then why are we even having this discussion?
no, that's a fair question. And you can legislate, and some people will get treated differently than others, but whether that's fair, appropriate is a good question.
And I think ultimately, I mean, and Josh is raising good questions, but I think ultimately, it does come down to, and I've said it before, I think it does come down to, I think you're going to have, it's a shift in thinking and how we've done planning in the past in looking at this ordinance. And it's a shift in the way we've looked at other things. And it's also bringing in a partner that we always talk about our water users and stuff, but it's also working with them and incentivizing our residents to change their behavior, as well as incentivizing through ordinance to change our behavior.
It needs to become like a new norm in landscape behavior, I think. I think in order to be a solution to the issues we're having, we should probably apply, I mean, of course, that's up to debate, but.
It would be easy for
Across
us
the
to
board.
just universal, if your new house, here's what you have to do. Is that the fair thing?
I'll just go back to what I was saying earlier. So C and D, or no, excuse me, C and E on this page we're looking at, which C is all new single-family homes have to submit a landscape and irrigation plan, showing that the requirements, landscape requirements are met, and that they have to install the landscape within 18 months or a maximum of 3 years. That is quite far afield from every other municipality that I'm aware of. used to be a landscape architect. I'm still licensed as a landscape architect. I never have ran into one single municipality that required that of single-family residential homes. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but along the Wasatch Front, I think most municipalities, with the exception of maybe Salt Lake City, but I don't think so, maybe Park City, but I don't think so, does not require a landscape and irrigation plan and the landscape to be installed within 18 months or a maximum of 3 years. And all my landscape architect friends will decry me saying this because I'm talking them out of jobs. But that goes pretty far in my mind.
I'll say this, when we bought our home that we just built here in West Kaysville, we had to have the front installed within 6 months. That was in the deed with the builder. I mean, they didn't care what was in the back, so, I mean, but that wasn't with the city, that was between.
Yeah, and I see, that's where I say that.
That was between the builder and us. So I think if the city goes out and says potentially, you know, if the city says the builder has to have that deeded with the homeowner, not between the city. I mean, I think there may be some flexibility there to see who's the enforcement.
And I wouldn't miss many of these sections if I agree with a lot of those comments. I'd be happy to personally remove just about all those. To me, I don't think they need to have a landscape architect put it together, something to scale, 35%. Great. You know,
Yeah, and-
all the other details we could go without.
Is it not on?
Make my day.
What's the red?
Green.
I've been talking without a thing on. Oh, hey, there I am. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I don't think a landscape architect either. But I'm just saying the plan itself, a landscape and irrigation plan, and the time frame. I think it goes farther than other municipalities. Maybe we want to do that. Maybe we're okay with that. I just point it out and say, I think there's probably a reason why we would be the exception, and it's maybe not the best reason, but.
I would be very much in support of removing these entire paragraphs, C, D, and E.
But I don't want to just be the lone man over here. I'm curious what everybody else thinks.
I think from an administrative side, we would support that.
I think we don't want to overburden.
Starting route to Collinsville.
Sorry. We don't want to overburden people who come in and make it such a process. And we also, staff-wise, for the city, we don't want to increase your workload to the point where you're having to deal literally in the weeds when you're dealing with landscaping. I mean, you want to be able to get people in and out, but you also want to make it so that there's some accountability. So however we can make administratively function, that's where you want to go.
So what I am just looking at here is we're thinking, this gets really easy if it doesn't have to apply to the individual
Right.
lots, right? So that would, we might be able to categorize them all separately too. We're just the standalone, single family, one-off builder versus a big development.
Lyle,
Give
I
them
wonder,
different requirements.
I wonder if you don't though, say like on commercial, where a commercial may have to come in with that. Because is there laying out for the city, and I'll go back and say this, we dealt with a site, we had a site group that came in for looking at sites here in the county, and they laid out a plan and they had it already designed for low water use, and the city was like, well, we don't require that. They were like, well, we do. And so it's interesting to see that come in already. I think the city ought to require that on commercial.
Was that kick us to the next? So I took this out sort of as just a general principle. I don't like diving into people's CCRs. I think that's their business, but this is the idea that the city could say, we're not going to record your subdivision if your CCRs say that something contrary to what we're trying to accomplish with this requires extra turf, requires something different than the city ordinances. Part of the reason I don't love that is even if we do have it in there and we look at it as a city, they can go change their covenants the day after I record them. And, you know, we're just not a party to them. We don't regulate necessarily their rules. So, thus, I scratched it. But if anybody has different thoughts there, we
So
can.
Lyle, I suspect, and this is just my suspicion with the legislature, that we're going to see some of this language slip into legislation coming out in the next session, if not sooner. But I think you're going to see homeowner associations again. The ADU ordinance was overridden, but some of this is going to get overridden because they've seen some higher use in water usages through HOAs.
Okay, this is the commercial one that I think Steve was talking about. Is this does get more specific and detailed, or at least I think it could be well beyond what the residential does. This is the 15% requirement of their landscape areas. No more than that, it should be turf. So it's pushing the maximum amount of grass that they can have. And with that, it calls out the specific plans, showing the materials, the plants, this the irrigation design and plant design. This is red because I just changed where it was in order from the ordinance, so this is still their text. Anyway, the type of sprinkler controller they're using, and these are the details showing how much and how it's going to function on their plan to show how much water they're using. I didn't scratch it yet, but kind of highlighted it. So this and the ETO, I sort of as a principle like the idea of, okay, I'll just let you get creative and do whatever you want as long as you're within your allowed water usage. Go ahead and have at it, and maybe that includes turf, and maybe that includes no turf, a lot of different ways for them to do it. It's been my experience that all of these details, again, are extremely hard to, that might be an exaggeration, but actually verify on site after install. For us as staff and the time we have to go out there and check the sprays, the valves, how it's functioning, all those details. It's quite a bit of minutia to check on, but it's not necessarily bad practice for a landscape architect to have drawn something up, put it together, and likely the crews that build commercial sites will follow it. I also think if you were to just check, for example, the amount of turf, and you go hire a landscape installing crew to, landscape plans are more like guidelines in my experience. They're going to do their own thing anyway when it comes to the system that they install. So I'd be okay even leaving this out and then to a certain degree trusting that they'll do it. So I don't know what the best answer is. I guess that's why I highlighted it, but just kind of that's my experience. It's not a bad effort for someone to go through whether or not they follow it.
Yeah, I mean, if you require a plan and you don't inspect it, the landscape contractors are not, and I have lots of clients who are landscape contractors. They may not maliciously do it, but they're not going to follow the plan. I mean, Dan could tell us probably better than anybody. If he wasn't looking over contractors' shoulders, they may not do exactly what he would like them to do. Same thing with landscape contractors. And so if the city can't go and have the quote-unquote four-way inspection of the irrigation system, then maybe we have to scale it back.
Yeah, generally at best, where they're at the end when they're wrapping up and saying, okay, we'll count the trees, look at the caliper inches and species and a few things like that.
But it also
it's
sounds
a tough one to
like
follow.
the onus isn't on the city to check. Sounds like the onus is on the water district from what I recall. That's why they were kind of joking about, well, we don't have the amount of people unless we hire more. So maybe at some point they decide to hire more people to enforce it. So yeah, I don't think the onus is on us, if I'm not mistaken.
The one unique thing about commercial is we do allow commercial properties to hook up to our culinary system for their irrigation use. I don't know if it's about half and half, but we do have a lot of commercial users who just use culinary, and so all of our residential properties, with a few exceptions east of the highway, are on a secondary provider. But we have let our commercial areas use this, and partly because they have just less landscape areas in general. Some of them like to have it year-round, and I can only speculate a little bit at why that's historically put in. But then that does fall back on the city in that particular instance on how they're using it, if it's on our culinary water. But the good thing about those, and the good thing about the forthcoming irrigation, is they're metered, and so you wouldn't be that hard to monitor the use, and if something's out of control, to then go out and regulate it. And I suppose if it's on the books, even if we didn't catch it the first time and we see someone who's wasting water and excessive user, maybe we could go back to these types of items and say, sorry, your drip irrigation lines aren't filtered properly, or I don't know, but we could go through a line item by line item to help bring them into compliance. Pretty rare, I would think.
Yeah, that's the first line of checks and balances right there is that meter, so.
I like the meter as an example of, there are multiple water-saving strategies or mechanisms we can impose that don't go as far as dictating what's on the ground, so to speak. So smart controllers, metering waters, requiring meters, all of those things are going to cut down water usage drastically in and of themselves, whether we say 35% turf or not. And I would say that gets at more of what I think I would be in favor of. And get to your point, Lyle, where you just say, here's the standard. If you meet it, however you meet it on the site, knock yourself out. But you meet the water allowance standard, we don't care what it looks like. I mean, to another example, I think if you were to bring in here, parade in here all the manufacturers, the Hunter, the Rainbird, the Toro, whoever, they're going to say, why are you throwing shade on our spray heads, our overhead spray? Our overhead spray has great, the precipitation rate can be the exact same as drip lines, and they're not as bad as you think they are, so why are we limiting overhead spray, I guess would be another example, where if you take overhead spray out and the water allowance is still met, then whether they're using drip or overhead spray, it doesn't matter. And that's where I'm saying, I don't know if we need to go as far as dictating those details as opposed to just setting a standard and let property owners or developers, follow through with the standard.
I think I do understand why they say no overhead spray. We've got heavy wind, then that
Yep,
that
that's
gets
a part,
taken away. That's
sure.
part of it,
Uh-huh.
I would imagine, and then the evaporation. So, I'm assuming that when they put these things, they've done some research.
Well, but
especially for that, at least that's what I'm assuming.
But what I'm saying is their overhead sprays, they're not just your grandma's overhead sprays anymore. They have come so far that if we had the manufacturers come in here, they could tell you why the overhead sprays are better than drip lines, is what I'm saying. They make, there's these MP rotors that aren't spray that gets blown to the wind. It's very specific, and very little water gets blown to the wind. Is what I'm saying is we don't know what we don't know about the technology of overhead sprays, if I just want to die on that hill. And if we had guys come in here and tell us that, they actually explain their product, you might find that overhead sprays aren't as bad as we think they are. So why do we have to regulate that level of detail as opposed to just set the standard of how much water you can use or not and let them do what they want in the detail level?
How about this? Can we go back to the district and ask them why they were so specific in these areas? I'm just curious. I mean, that is a good point. Have they done their research on the new? I'd really be curious.
Yeah, I'd have to ask him.
Okay.
This is super detailed, and it's not,
Yeah.
I would guess, and I don't know for sure. I looked at some different ordinances around. I tried to dig out the West or South Jordan one. I didn't know if I found it, but I found
Right.
one. Again, when I used to work with Salt Lake County, it was a lot like this. It was
Yeah.
extremely detailed. And
Yep.
when I would do stuff in Mill Creek, we're going out and looking at drip heads and irrigation lines and things on post-construction inspection. And again, at that point, it was always, well, it's close enough. You're accomplishing generally the right thing we're looking for. And they did talk about the water usage and all that calculation had to be in there on what they're doing. So I assume Weber Basin found some of the more detailed examples in the region, and it looks like they kind of pulled some of those in with the all-inclusive. And those are some big jurisdictions with a lot of staff, and a lot of time, and different expertise on staff that can do it. I think the direction I'm hearing going here, and it's not too different than I think the general philosophy of the commission by and large of let's give people some flexibility, let them do it and not get too specific. I think that works best for us, frankly, as administration as well. So we could come back with some modifications to simplify it quite a bit. I'll double check with Weber Basin that we're meeting their minimums, again, for that incentive part. It still may say 35% turf or less and no park strip type stuff, but I think beyond that, we may not need to be we're really that specific, and unless there's other key points or major points, I think that's what we need from the landscape discussion tonight.
I agree with the spirit of the law, saying that we want to give people flexibility. One of the sidebar comments I had while we were on the tour was just talking about, let's make sure that when we do this, we don't set people up for failure. Show them what it looks like. That's why they have the examples there. Give a before and after picture, everything. Or else what you do potentially have happening is that somebody doesn't look at the doesn't have the examples, does it, fails miserably, looks like crap, and then everybody else looks at it and say, no way, I'm doing that. And he agreed. He said, that's why we have this display here, we have the pictures. So that's the only thing that I would ask is, why were these so specific? Is there a reason? That's the only thing that I could think of. And if there's not, then sure, yeah, let people be flexible. And you're right, the meter tells all. If you can make it, awesome. Have somebody out there doing a rain dance as long as you can, meet the requirements.
And just one other footnote to that is, I think it's logical that even the best overhead spray head will have some greater likelihood of evaporation and wind loss or what have you. But at the same time, drip irrigation is not perfect either. When you can't see the water running, it might just run for a heck of a lot longer than you realize, and you're putting on way more water than you otherwise would if you see the sprinklers running. Or your neighbors don't shame you when your drip irrigation is going, right? So you might use more. I think, in fact, I don't know, I can't quote any chapter and verse, but I think there might be studies to that effect that show that drip irrigation has almost a greater susceptibility to use more water because of that. You don't see it. So anyway, we don't need to get to that level, is what I'm saying. Just get to the water usage level, and as long as with a meter or with some calculation, as long as they're meeting that, however they do it on the ground, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
If we made it more like this, simpler, is there anywhere in the ordinance where we could just have ideas for people to follow? I mean, I know there's all these resources, but when I'm starting to do something, I Google it, and I mean, then you find out you have cancer. I mean, like, you never know what you're going to find there. Is there any way to come up with like a side thing that we're
absolutely,
keeping that kind of helps guide people?
It wouldn't live in the ordinance if it's not something we can require and mandate, but absolutely on our, we've got great resources in the area, the Botanical Center and others that have, probably to a lesser degree, but they've left pamphlets at our office. When people come to building a home, they can pick up stuff from Utah State on, what kind of plantings and things they should be. We could build something even better, I think, within our website as a resource, and we could link people to things like that and other existing resources. We could always improve on that. I think it's a good idea.
And again, that's why this program requires you to do that 1 hour on-site training with them, where they do basically gave us a tour. So.
Mm-hmm.
Just one observation. I mean, one thing that kind of came through when we went on the field trip was that, they've been doing this is like the Flip the Strip is one of their programs. The other one is to put in water meters. But I mean, even though they have that program, and that program to put in water meters has been in place longer, they're still only like a fraction of the way through their users.
Right.
And so I think if we're going to make this be based on water or like the monitoring, I mean, I agree, that's the best way to do it. But the reality is if people have to wait to get their meter to be able to do this, I don't think it's going to happen. So I think that maybe putting the restriction on the 35% might be more practical. And so that's just one other way to look at it.
Yeah. The little catch that will help with that, new construction is required to have metered. So it's retrofitting the existing environment that is going to take forever. I mean, who knows how long, but where this primarily applies to these new builds, they're all going to have water meters required statewide, I think, and we're seeing that with our district, so we do have a little bit of a save there. But for example, and I think I mentioned this to you prior to the meeting, I just got a meter put on mine. I'm not a new build, but Benchman's come in and swapped out my old for the new, but I've yet to see how much water I'm using, so I don't know the results from it. So there's a long ways to go, even once those meters are in, on helping us monitor that water.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it, the only thing prohibiting the water retailers, if you will, from putting in meters on every user is money, right?
It's expensive, yeah, to put it
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, and I doubt the state is going to be, A, mandating meters, and B, paying for meters anytime soon. So,
I wouldn't say that. I think that's where we're headed.
So they've mandated meters, and they're coming. So I
oh,
ta- I
well,
ta- so I saw-
no. What I'm saying is retrofitting.
Oh, retro, no, they
They're-
are, so Benchland is now.
So this, no, what I'm saying, okay, let me just clarify. Again, I love to be proven wrong, so I could be proven wrong, but if the state, I would be very surprised if the state allocated money to retrofit every existing secondary irrigation connection in the state. That's what I'm saying.
Well, so I just talked to Benchland yesterday. So Benchland has done all West Kaysville. It's cost them $10 million over 5 years. So they anticipate having the entire, and it's coming through a federal grant.
I'll see, now,
So it's federal. And so, and that, they're running that through Weaver, so the Davis Weaver Canal Company is retrofitting everything also. All new gets it, and then they're retrofitting everything else.
See, now, to me, that's the lowest, again, I said this up at the
Yeah.
meeting, that's the lowest at the, when we were Davis, or the water district, that's the lowest hanging fruit. If everyone had a meter and they got a bill every month showing their use, water use would go down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a federal grant.
Yeah,
for each-
okay,
each
interesting.
canal company.
Yeah.
But the state's mandate, the governor's saying mandate.
Interesting.
Okay, well, the good news is here, we don't need to belabor it necessarily, but we have time to work on it. It's not a deadline one like our ADU ordinance that we saw last, so I'll take a draft at simplifying it more. I think in our outreach to let people know about this, we said we'd have a public hearing at our next meeting on the 9th. So doesn't mean you have to pass something then, but we'll get their feedback as well on a cleaner draft and whether we're ready to pass something along or continue fine tuning it. I think that's just a heads up, our next steps. Hopefully you have a large crowd here. I think by and large, we've had emails come in. I think the commission's received a few. People are interested in this type of ordinance, so I think there'll be support. We'll get it done. Okay. With that, Mr. Chair, I don't know if we're moving on to the next, or I'll look to you as to what you'd like to proceed with.
Yeah, I'm ready to move on to the next.
All right, so this one, you gotta jog your memories a little bit further back. This is our home occupation ordinance. I left within the staff report all of our home occupation types. So most of them aren't affected, but I thought maybe just a quick reminder what we have on the books, and then these scenarios that we're kind of coming up with on at least maybe one idea of how to address it, and just looking for your feedback. Is that the right direction, or do we need to go a different route, or nah, let's not bother type detail. So we have minor home occupations, which essentially means you wouldn't even know they're there. An artist in his basement drawing paintings or something, no traffic, no deliveries, really no employees, no customers, but they run a business, no impact. A major home occupation A is an office that's allowed to have one employee, but no customers. And so it says specifically here, like a professional office facility or telephone solicitation. So if you have somebody that comes help you do some paperwork, but no customers, you're a major A. Technically, I think that still comes to the Planning Commission. I'd have to double check that. We just don't see them very often. Major B, you see regularly. These are the occupations that have customers coming, and groups and contractors that might have equipment, those types of items. Still a home business. A major home occupation C was created not too long ago with the direction of the Planning Commission, which is ones we saw a lot. They may have a customer like a home hair salon, but it's kind of a one-on-one appointment. We've learned to understand how they work. They're pretty predictable, and there are some controls on it, but it's the one-on-one type appointment scenarios with a few exceptions. Single chair esthetician, small group for tutoring, under 4 students, small daycare and childcare situations. And then you have agricultural home occupations, which are a little bit larger. The few that I can think of around that we've done are kind of small engine repair. There's a very popular one off of Phillip Street that you can go take your lawnmower to, and that's a agricultural home occupation. There's a couple that have auto shops around that, as long as they don't have too many cars. So that's your last general home business type. Then you have childcare, which again we see regularly. This talks about enforcement. And I've just stuck here at the end this new type, which, again, under the scenario I think we gave, if you had somebody who has a tennis court and maybe the next door neighbor is really good at tennis and thinks they could teach some people, could they go to somebody else's property and run their business away from their home? And we just gave some examples, and I think at the time I was like, I don't know how to wrap my mind around this, and I don't think we did it either as staff. What might blow up or how might this get used by different business types? So the commission said, hey, why don't you go come up with an idea that helps eliminate some of the bad potential that might come about and focus in on the things that maybe we were really trying to hone in on. So the idea here is an instructional home occupation is a business which may provide services to individuals or groups of limited size where academics or skills are taught. And so it's a teaching type business specifically is what this is trying to gear towards. Again, some of the examples that we thought of are maybe somebody has a commercial kitchen and they'd like to teach, not everybody has something like that, so they could go next door and, hey, my neighbors let me use our kitchen to teach everyone how to make crepes or whatever it is. Or swimming pools is one that's come up where not everybody has a pool, but people like the ability to do the short and small group lessons rather than the public pool. So if somebody were to let somebody else use theirs, is that an option? So that's the type of stuff this is intended to kind of cater to. I think to a certain degree that's something that there's services people appreciate having around, and whether that's the right model to do them under or not, that's kind of the discussion. I don't know if I'll go into everything detail and great discussion, but just to show some of the lines, it's got to be conducted within the residential site, but right here is kind of the unique thing. The resident of the dwelling on the site need not own or even work for the business, but the business needs to provide proof they've got permission to function on that person's property. So that is very different than every other type. Every other type of business is the resident has to be part of the business in some fashion. So that is a unique change. And then it's trying to scale it down a little bit. Okay, so no more than 4 people working there, and no more than 12 students, which 12 probably rings a bell here. It's just something we've kind of mimicked with other ordinances and rules. It's not supposed to change the nature of or character of the home. So again, if it's using a swimming pool or a tennis court or your kitchen or whatever, this facility that you have that maybe someone else wants to use should still look like a residence. And I think that is applicable in most of ours. It's a limitation on how large it can be. Again, right here, that's required to teach a skill, but you're not going to be able to have tournaments or spectator events at these particular businesses. And we've seen that in a couple occasions where people, again, in their own home, maybe they teach dance. I think we've had one of these in the past couple years, and they thought maybe once or twice a year they'd do a recital, and we've dealt with those specifically. This is saying no, you couldn't do that at somebody else's house. You need to go rent a space or something to do the recital if you're in that kind of scenario. Limited size of vehicles here, working backwards from the bottom. Planning Commission's going to see these. You can place limitations on it, including the number of vehicles, the number of students like we've seen with others. You can still have your yard sale, that's separate from this. No commercial suppliers, you're not going to be selling stuff as the primary function of the business. I suppose if you were a home cooking school in a commercial kitchen and you thought every student ought to have a certain spatula, then you could sell that as part of the business, but you're not going to be selling pots and pans at your neighbors just for fun, right? So I don't know if we hit all the points or not as to what the Planning Commission would look for, but looking at this and kind of the idea, maybe just a very big picture, what's the temperature of you as a commission on, we think these types of businesses fulfilling this type of purpose is something that we think could be okay in Kaysville. And maybe after answering that question, okay, then how would it function, I guess? What limitations are appropriate to place on it? If anybody has strong opinions that we don't think people should be running a business out of a neighbor's house or anything.
So does this cover I know there's some swim organizations that operate and they'll just go to different, a large group going to multiple people's pools. Does this allow for that?
That's partly how this came up, to be honest. So we didn't know how some of these were operating, and we had people that we chatted with, and they even came and talked to the commission because they're required to do so, and we just didn't ask all the right questions as to how it was functioning, and have learned that yes, there's some of that happening to a degree already. So with that, we received some direction that there's a lot of interest in maybe allowing that to continue, and I don't know that that's across the board. So not that we need to do it, but let's look at it to see if maybe it can be appropriate or not by examining the ordinance. So that's a great example of what this would try to accommodate if we think it's the right thing.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with it, because when I think about using other people's pool, whatnot, it's an economic issue, and if you don't allow that, then you're economically tying large group of people. Bias, discrimination, call it what you will, but that's how I look at it. Not everybody can afford a pool.
Lyle, question on point, paragraph 8. I think there's a slight gap or ambiguity there. What % of an accessory building could be used for the use?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it doesn't say that specifically, so we could get more detailed on it. Just as a maybe point of reference, so an accessory building, correct me here if I'm wrong, Dan, can't cover more than 10% of a lot area, and the total number of accessory buildings can't equate to more than 20%.
Less the house.
So less the house, thank you. So it's going to be a similar figure to what those are, I think, if it's no more than 20% of the gross, or sorry, number 8, 10% of the lot area.
So
It could fit within an accessory building.
I guess my suggestion then would be, it sounds like 100% of an accessory building in theory could be used. If 100% of an accessory building still fits under the 20 or the 10, then why not? I would guess I would suggest just clarify this. Someone could envision, hey, I'll be able to use the entire upstairs of my detached garage or whatever for this use, and then that might expand the possibilities.
Would you think it's good to allow use? Do you want it to be more restrictive? So
I personally would say if they have an accessory building and it would have to obviously fit in with all the other requirements of an accessory building, why not just allow accessory buildings to fit this use?
yeah. And one example I could think of is that, I don't know that anyone's doing business out of them, but so people build basketball courts and they put them inside buildings and they're big. So they're going to maximize that accessory building size to do that. And that could be an example where somebody's teaching Pilates or gym classes or basketball or you name it, these gym type spaces, they may be large accessory buildings. And if what you're saying is that's fine as long as it meets an accessory building allowance.
Sure.
Let's let people use it.
They'd have to have a big lot and
Yeah.
whatever, and sure.
I know somebody who's got an accessory building that he uses as an art studio.
Yeah, that's great.
And he has, every so often, he has a bunch of people over and teaches a little art.
Yeah.
And uses the whole building to do that.
Whereas if it was in his house, he may not be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So Lyle, where do these percentages come from? Because I feel like 10% of a lot area is pretty restrictive. Or, I mean, I
Yeah.
could be wrong, but I mean, we just had private pool lessons this last summer with my kids, and I don't think they could fit 10 pools onto that lot, so they might not be able to use that, I guess.
I think I just copied it from another section. Where it came from historically, I'm not positive, but I think it's kind of 20% of a gross floor area. Maybe I just made up the 10%. But yeah, they're arbitrary, to be honest. And so it's just meant to restrict it a little bit to make sure it doesn't get too out of hand. So we could certainly change it to something that fits more appropriate. And maybe it doesn't even need to be percentage based, but.
I mean, if nothing else, I could see making it a little bigger so that things can actually comply with it.
I can give you a little history. We used to only allow 1,000-foot building. And then they wanted to make it bigger. So if there was, this was a few years back, they wanted bigger accessory buildings, maybe on some bigger lots. So that's when they went, like, if you had a 40,000-foot lot, that would allow you to build a 4,000-foot garage rather than just the straight across 1,000. And so that's where the percentages came from, probably 5 or 10 years ago, probably longer than that, about 10 or 15 years ago. But I can remember when originally you could have 1,000-foot detached building. People start buying bigger trailers, and they want to cover them. So that's how they regulated how big it could go. And then with the accessory buildings.
So the bigger the accessory building, the less grass, the less water, right? I'm making the connection here. I'm kidding.
That's what I'm working on.
That could help you meet your 35%.
There you go, that's it, done.
I've even heard that pools, if you don't refill it, eventually are less water
There you go.
consumptive than grass, so. Whether that's true, I don't know. Yeah, what do you think about the group size? So, we're saying you could have as many as 4 people who have nothing to do with your property, but if you've given them permission, they're welcome to come. You know, in this case, you might have 4 instructors and 12 students. You could further limit that, in theory, under number 14. So when they come through the conditional use process, but that's the cap, right? So is that too large of a cap? Do we want a cap and make it just case by case?
Case by case.
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to also foster community too, so.
So do you think, Mr. Chair, with the case by case, should I keep the 4 and 12 and let use discretion within that, or get rid of the 4 and 12 and just leave it up to the discretion of the commission? Because again, they're not based on anything specific. It's, to be honest,
Yeah.
trying to scale it a little
I'd
bit.
ask my fellow commissioners to pipe in on that one.
I mean, I think we'd have to make it like if we were gonna change it, make it more, like the residential childcare. I think we just have to put something in there about making sure that it complies with whatever state safety standards there are, because I don't think we want to be complicit in allowing hazardous situations. I don't know, maybe that's not in our wheelhouse.
And I'd have to look, so the state is very involved when it comes to the childcare and daycare type situations, but they probably don't have standards or specifics for us to kind of default to on a lot of these other business types that might come about. So that's where it's going to be hard if it's too open-ended, but you may be able to do it on the case by case.
Well, the state gutted a lot of the business licensing anyway, so I think they're pretty laissez-faire on this.
And in fact, when it comes to business licensing, they're almost becoming more laissez-faire with it. We're trying to promote economic development and not make it more difficult than it already is to get licensed. So, yeah, so within this, there's a certain range kind of that's established. I don't know, Mindy, if you're, so Mindy will be heavily involved in the businesses where she's their licensing, so.
I'm just wondering if you put a range and then it'd be determined by.
So are you advocating free-range business licensing?
Perhaps.
I think it's helpful to have a cap somewhere. Maybe this is too low. But
Yeah.
to set a bar, set an expectation that, you know, you're gonna get to a certain scale, you need to be a commercial situation, and that's
What I-
what they've tried to do historically.
So what you don't want to have happen is you don't, I think, what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to over congest a neighborhood.
Right.
And what you also don't want to happen is eventually, in that business development cycle, you want to get that business to the point where they have to go get that flex space and grow up and become a larger business and then grow and develop. I mean, if that's what their goal is, I think thinking through how we want to do that, whether it's a subjective cap or it's set here, but I think you need a case by case, but yeah, you're correct. Because as we're developing in that business entrepreneurial cycle, the goal should be, if they're not going to grow past that, that's great. But if they're going to grow past that, then you do want them to move into some sort of flex space, if they can find it.
Our businesses have been created enough that as they're growing, they're just franchising to other homes, basically. So it's getting unique, but if the impact is no greater than what it would have been in a different neighborhood, maybe that's okay, and that's kind of what this is trying to inquire.
You know, in one of the models we saw when I was at GoEd was putting, bringing out in rural, bringing in call centers and doing the training at a central location in Price, and then franchising them, literally putting them back in their houses. And so there was real concern about that, but then I think this is kind of a different model, but I think it works. You want that business to grow because you don't want all those delivery boxes for Amazon going to that house. You want that development in that entrepreneurial cycle to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers should be, but yeah, it's a good call out. That might be too restrictive, 4 and 12.
We could raise it, and someone may come in and we get to a point where we find, well, we're getting too permissive, but it might be easier to give more in the future if we decide that we're seeing models that would have been a good idea if we would have allowed a few more employees or students. But it's going to be hard to take away if you approve somebody with 18 or 10 or 10 staff or something like that. Once they're approved, they're kind of grandfathered in, and you're not going to be able to get that back, right? So that's just a train of thought as to where you want to start from.
Lyle, I think this is like ADUs. I think it's going to be a small percentage who actually take advantage of this. And I think it's going to be case by case. I think you start small and see where people come in at, but leave some flexibility.
Or could we have language in there that, you know, Josh being a lawyer, you could help out with this, but that would say, here's the limit. Having said that, we're open to on a case-by-case situation? Yeah, sweet. Lawyer says yes.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a way to write it, so. If you like that, I think that's fine, and that's not too different. Mindy was just reminding me that we almost always tell daycares or preschools 12.
Right.
But that's not specifically written in there, but we've just been telling them that forever because that's what we do. And then they've come and asked for, well, you know, my case can have 14, and the planning commission was able to consider it. So this would just be more clearly written. I'm sure we could come up with language. I'll have to look to our attorney to do that, or maybe ask for help from the commission.
Look
Pro
to
bono.
yours. Nick, or whatever.
I mean, I think those are kind of the key points again, so this is one that we'll fine tune. It sounds like we're not necessarily far off, that there is general interest and consensus that this could work in Kaysville. I think it's pretty unique. You know, like in the landscape ordinance, I could go to nearly every city in the state and find an example. I don't know that other cities are doing anything like this, but you know, I think the swimming one's an interesting one, and maybe it shows too much of a personal bias. It's not a service you can get otherwise in Kaysville, with just very few exceptions of those homes. So if this allows for, I think it pulls at the heartstrings of a lot of Kaysville residents of instruction and teaching, and we can focus in on that and rein it in enough. It could be pretty interesting opportunity for Kaysville. So
Sometimes being the only city to do something is a good idea. Sometimes it's not a good idea.
So, and Lyle, I'll say the other thing on the second ordinance, on this occupational one, I just ran all the job growth numbers from 2019, 2020 comparison. We actually grew jobs during the COVID, which is interesting. Davis County, so you compare Davis Weber, we compared Northern Utah, And what's interesting is you look statewide, we lost jobs. And so we were kind of pondering as we talked with the state economist. People in Davis County are entrepreneurial, and I think by allowing for more entrepreneurial business to grow and setting those conditions, it allows for people to get through things like recessions and other things. Because what happened in 2019 when we shut down, people grew businesses here. We actually, our job numbers and our unemployment, unemployment went up in some sectors, but we actually grew jobs, which is unusual. Weaver County lost like 9, I mean, it was a huge chunk of jobs. And so I think we went back and kind of looked at our sectors, but it was almost all entrepreneurial, countywide. So I think there's some sectors here that we need to consider, but this fosters that.
Well, curious, yeah, this was a very unique thing that we chatted about in our office that, again, like I said, it just was hard not to look to an example, but if there's that general interest, we'll finesse it and get it right, and we may be ready to push this one to, doesn't sound like there's drastic changes. I've got some notes on the things to look at, get the public's input, probably at our next meeting as well, together with the landscape, and under a similar deal, whether you pass it at that time or not, that may influence how we continue to craft and alter the text here to get it right. So, yeah, I think those are really our items tonight, Mr. Chair. So with that, we'll kick it back to you. We can keep moving along on our agenda.
Okay. Call to the public.
Hello.
Go to item number 5. Back to the staff.
Yeah, so you got anything that you just about to chime in?
At the APA conference.
APA conference, I had a lot of interest, so if you haven't seen an email and you let me know you wanted to go, reach out. I may have typed your email in wrong or something, but I think we've got everybody registered that wanted to participate. That's coming up very soon. We should have here in the next few days the draft general plan ordinance, or general plan for the amendment, and so we'll start kicking that around. We're going to be on a pretty tight time frame to get that adopted by the end of the year is what we're pushing for. It's going to be a pretty big document, and we're going to want to get eyes on it and lots of input and feedback at that point once they've given us the additional details. So watch your inbox.
They're still talking about September 9th to get it to us, or a little earlier than that?
They've been shooting for the end of the month here to
End of the month?
to have something over to me at the office. So I think whether we look at it specifically on your next meeting or not,
If they get it
may
to us-
very well do.
If they get it to us by the end of the month, yeah, I'd say send it out, and then let's talk about it on I guess our next meeting is September 9th.
September 9th.
Yeah.
So just as soon as I have it, you're all going to get copies of it, and we want your input on it of what's good, what's bad, what input do you have for it. And I think, unless there's additional items to pass back to us for staff that we can be working on for you, you can elect whoever wants to do the next week's videos. We're getting out there a little bit more on Facebook, trying to let everybody know what's happening in these meetings, so we can bring out the big crowds and
It's working well.
When we get the right items on the agenda, I think it's a good thing. I think we've had some very good good work done, good presentation, and I think the public will ultimately enjoy that. So if you might get assigned to it, maybe we'll let the chair pick who the next victim is.
Well, so
Yes. We're
what
going to have our own
kind,
reality TV show here next.
what kinds of things are
So
topics?
what so far we've had our chair and vice chair do. The last 2 meetings, they've put videos out on the Kaysville City Planning Commission Facebook page.
Oh, it's amazing.
Do
Emmys. We're going to
Oh,
win
no.
Emmys.
Yes, we have a moment. We still have a minute before 8:30, so I can fill in like we can fill in some.
I agree.
I'm gonna make you guys.
So, I mean, one of the things that we can do.
fumble through this. 'cause
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we can do is like post-meeting, we can also have videos explaining what happened to, or how we went and discussed the items. And, I mean, that's an idea. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
basically, the point of this is educating the public.
Oh, okay,
So, and to make Abby famous.
great.
Yes. what I'm going for, famous for land use.
All right, you guys ready?
Yes.
So we've done 4 different videos. The first one, if you go all the way down to the bottom. That's right, the pictures. Going right,
Yeah, do one with Quan.
right there. This one right here. was just-
Quan looks like he just got out of jail.
Quan makes the video.
My friends made fun of me.
Wow, look at that.
Commission, this is my vice chair of the Kaysville Planning Commission.
The planning commission is tasked with making recommendations to the city council regarding the general plan, land use ordinances, amendments to the zoning map, and actions on subdivision applications. The commission also acts on land use applications such as conditional use permits and variances.
So layman's term, when a resident wants to rezone their property or add an additional dwelling unit, comes up in front of our commission.
The purpose of these videos is to inform and educate the Kaysville residents about how the planning commission works and the things we can and can't do in our meetings.
Like most of you, I wasn't really aware of how the planning commission worked until there were requests for a new development in my neighborhood. So we're hoping that these videos at least shed some light on how the planning commission works and the issues that are brought forth.
Yes. And he's right there.
It's the best one.
Yeah.
All right.
So then they discussed the 3 items that were
Yeah.
on the agenda.
Yeah.
For the first week that we did it.
Oh, all right, cool.
So then there was a clip for each one, so this was, yeah. Well, they need to
You
watch
just want this one?
Oh, you need to watch that. My kids are in the background. Planning Commission and City Council visit the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, where they were given a tour of the demonstration gardens. The city continues to work on updating ordinances to promote more efficient landscaping. In this meeting, the Planning Commission will be considering changes that may affect new development and construction by limiting the amount of grass that will be allowed. It will also open the way for potential incentives for existing residents and businesses to modify their yard to make them more water efficient. We will discuss what was learned and prepare a draft to be reviewed on September the 9th. The meeting on September 9th will be a public hearing where we will look forward to having input from Kaysville residents about that ordinance. The next topic on the Planning Commission agenda is a look at home businesses and possible ordinance changes to allow for some new variations that have not been previously allowed. In limited instances, this could allow more flexibility in who can work from a residential property in order to provide education experiences.
Nice. See? Love it.
There you go.
It was all scripted, so
Yes.
no off the cuff unless you want to.
Unless you're brave.
I'm flexible for filming times.
You're assured election after this.
I telling you. I mean, she looked like a gardener in that video.
Looking at no notes,
Yeah.
very smooth.
See?
Can't tell that the notes are right behind the camera there.
And both of her daughters are sitting on my lap, and we're like, candy.
I was like, Athena, feed Ileana a piece of candy every time she swallows until the video's done. Yeah.
Those are amazing.
That's what we're up to, so watch for your turn, and anyway, if you've got more homework or anything else you want us to be working on, we've got some work we'll do on these drafts that we talked about this evening and bring them back, and anything else you'd like to bring before us.
Oh, general plan?
Yeah, so watch your inbox for your homework, and likely September the 9th, we may be talking about it as a commission.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds like a video for Steve.
Make sure you take pictures and such. Use it for the video.
Okay, if we have nothing else.
So moved.
Yes. Done. Gavel. Sweet.
You guys, nice job, 8:30.
8:30, woo! I was hoping for 8, but.
So moved.
I was gonna say, if Lila talked a little faster, we could
Yes.
get out by 8, you know.